Okay. I guess we can proceed to status updates. Does anyone have something they'd like to share?
We have mostly just been reviewing some PRs occasionally and helping kind of keep up to date with what's going on with the extension stuff, the builder and run extensions. So that's coming along nicely.
Yeah, I guess I've been focusing on getting the patch release out. And I'm now trying to get up to speed with what's all the conversation that's been happening around extensions and Docker files. I don't really think there's much to say about release planning at this point in time, given that we just shipped our patch. And I personally have not looked at the issues in the next platform or build pack APIs. But I'm assuming we will do that at some point. And
which API are we targeting for all the image extensions?
so that's a good question. I think since the RFC hasn't been merged yet, it hasn't been added to an API milestone, I guess. So right now, there's stuff in the build pack and platform APIs, but I don't think it's been, strategically thought out, like what do we want to ship in the next batch of features.
I have a few RFCs that I wanted to talk about, which are open, but that might also come into play with like the order of these things. I don't know how much it will impact any of this, but I have a few questions about those RFCs. Unrelated to sort of related to the OCI layout discussion, but I'm gonna table that for the next office hours. But I have like a couple, 3 RFCs or something on the implementation side that I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I think actually you could go ahead and talk about them. I don't believe we have anything else on the agenda, so.
Okay, let me try and share my screen. I think the first RFC is like a fairly simple one. I'm hoping it wouldn't require any build pack changes, and like there would be a platform API bump, but I'm not hoping that in order to support this platform API, I don't think the platform implementers will actually have to do anything apart from saying that it's a platform API bump. But the idea is that currently OCI config has this object known as history, which is what like a lot of things like Dive or Docker Hub or any container registry, or there was this layer visualization tool recently which sort of displayed images like a GitHub repository with all the layers. And I noticed some of these tools break when you use build pack images. For example, that layer website doesn't work at all with build pack images because I think it just expects like history, like the history key to be defined and contain some valid values. And this is also useful for, I think, like in general as an experience when like people are looking at images on container registries, they should be able to tell what layer belongs to which build pack, or like what contents it has. So the idea is simple, that for like we populate this history key with information we already have. So like if it's a build pack specific layer, we just put like, I have a template in here, but we don't need to follow that template if people have any opinions about it. But the idea was to just put the build pack ID. If there's a build pack name, put that in there. I know name is optional, but the ID will always be there. And put the layer name if it's like a build pack layer. And then for the application slices, I currently have this slices.name key. Now I realize this is actually a build pack API change. But
Yeah, I was about to say, yeah, I love this, but I kind of wonder if we should just use the index of the slice, like application slice 0, slice 1. Like, is it really worth having the launch toggle change? I don't know.
yeah, I'm fairly, like, I don't have any strong opinions on either. I just thought that if a build pack is going ahead and making the distinction of actually putting a set of files in a slice, I'm guessing they're somehow correlated. And if they are, it might make sense to name them. I'm guessing we can make it an optional key, so that if it's not present, we just put slice 0, 1, 2, 3. If there's a name there, we can put it there. That way, no backwards incompatible changes, you still get the history stuff. But if you want to put a name in there, you can. I can make that optional, or I can remove it entirely. I don't have strong opinions. It's just that I thought that if someone's gone ahead and made a slice, which I have not seen a lot of build packs do, it must hold some meaning. So that's why, otherwise, like I have this thing which is like application workspace, or you can, that's for the generic one, you can just call it application slice 1, 2, 3 for whatever you want to call it. Yeah. The other reason was, like, I recently was using this feature because I wanted some things in an application slice, and later on I wanted to retrieve that application slice, like just that layer, through the diff ID, but I couldn't find it. For the other build pack layers, it's fairly easy to map the build pack ID layer name back to a diff ID and fetch it individually, but not as much for slices. But yeah, I just ended up using a build pack layer, doesn't require a slice, but I thought this might be useful. That's why I added it. But the main motivation was just so that we could use all of these tools and visualize build pack images more easily. Yeah.
I pasted in the chat an issue that Ben Hale opened on the life cycle a year ago, over a year ago. I think it's the same thing, right? It's this.
Oh, yeah.
And it looks like this RFC that you wrote is the one we were waiting for.
Okay. I'll just
point out that one of the, like, not sticking points, but I guess source of conversation on this issue was some disagreement over what the format should be, whether it should be JSON or some other bespoke format.
So I think, so there's a field in there that's not used as often, but the history field has a comment field or a document field and a created by field. Most of these tools like Dive use the created by field to actually show whatever is in there, like the command and the thing you see here is from the created by field. I've not seen anything use the comment field, but you could potentially put structured data in the comment field if you want to be there. I don't know what would require like a I don't know what would require something like this. The other alternative which I can add is like these are the default values for created by the lifecycle puts in case there's nothing there. And if you want, you can add something to your layer toml to set that field, which might address both the issues. So if people want a JSON structured field, they can do that. I was just trying to avoid introducing new API changes. And
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Like getting something in there is better than nothing at all. And we can iterate on whether someone wants to be able to control this more from the build pack or platform layer. But I feel like, yeah, I'd be okay with this even not having the slice naming part, and we can circle back around that later when someone who uses slices really wants that.
Yeah, I can do that. So what I will do is I'll remove this API change. I'll change that to slice index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, however you want to call it. And once this is added, since this I'm assuming will require no changes whatsoever apart from the lifecycle, we can then put an RFC for like if you want to introduce API changes to allow users to set these values to some custom strings or whatever. I just didn't want to introduce a bunch of API changes right now because I know there's so many API changes in flux. But yeah, I also don't know what happens in cases of RFCs like this, which are like purely lifecycle only changes, or I don't know whether this would be a platform API bump or whether we can just put it in the lifecycle given that nothing changes and like none of this was part of the spec anyway. This is just something we're doing to make these images more introspectable, I guess. But hey, if you have any strong opinions on any of these things, any comments appreciated. The other one that I added was, again, I was hoping for it to not, like, I don't think it is a new API change. It's just adding more metadata, same as the other one. The idea is that OCI defines a bunch of annotations on the manifest, which we have pretty close values for in a bunch of places. So we currently put, so these are all the annotations that OCI defines as standard keys, and I have put in here a mapping of where they're currently stored or where they can be sourced from without introducing anything new. So for example, there's the base image name that's currently stored in IO build packs metadata run image reference. There's base image digest, which I guess is also technically this, but like in the reference, we put both tags and unresolved tags and like digest depending on what the run image input was. But I guess we can just resolve the tag. We were given a tag and put that in the digest. There's image source, which comes from the source metadata repository. This is also part of the like project metadata toml, which is part of the current platform API, although it's not used much. Platforms can put things in here from the project toml, but there are other platforms like Kpack who also just put default things in there, even if you didn't specify things in the project toml. So like if you're building something from a Git repository, it will put the source repository and things like that. I think Pack also started to recently do this as part of one of the LFX projects. But the idea is like you can use a combination of, like the platform can choose to use a combination of project toml and other things to populate this project metadata file. So again, I'm not introducing anything new here. All of these keys are currently defined in the project toml, and the project metadata toml currently has a free form uh, source.metadata table. So the idea was just to provide these mappings so that platforms can populate this if they want to. And if they do, then we can just put these annotations on the manifest. Hi, Jason.
Hey, sorry I'm late.
Yeah, I'm just going over some of the recent RFCs. But I think the only issue with this RFC that I wanted to touch upon was that this defines these annotations in the manifest, and we do not have a manifest in the daemon case. So I've currently written this RFC such that it's conditional on the lifecycle being run in registry mode. And if you're running it in daemon mode, it's not going to put these things anywhere because it can't. I don't know how people feel about that divergence between the daemon use case and the registry use case.
I don't know enough about the ecosystem. What roughly what percentage of pack invocations would you say are done with push versus the daemon mode? Is it like 50-50, 10-90, 90-10?
I personally wouldn't know either. I think it depends from organization to organization and what their like practices are around creating these images. I've seen a lot of people do pack build and then do a Docker push, even though we recommend doing publish because it's faster.
Yeah.
I've seen people do that, and then there are platforms like Tecton and Kpack which don't have a daemon mode whatsoever and just rely entirely on registry. So Pack, as far as I know, is the only popular platform that uses the daemon mode. But yeah, like I think like a bunch of new features or RFCs that I've proposed are conditioned on the same fact. Like we can do things in the registry mode because it follows the normal OCI spec, and in the daemon mode things just go haywire because there's no manifest. There's a config, there's a manifest list or whatever doc calls it, and then just creates them on the fly, I guess, when you do push.
Yeah, so I guess this seems to me safe to do because it doesn't, if you're using daemon mode, it just doesn't change anything and provides value for people that are doing publish, and maybe adds it to the list of things, of reasons you should prefer to use publish if you don't need, like the pack build into the daemon and then Docker push, if you're not using the image in the meantime, is like an anti-pattern, right? You lose information. It's slower. It's worse in a lot of ways. And this is another reason that you should prefer publish and skip the daemon entirely, right? I think it's a useful, like I think it's a step forward. It might not be a step forward for all users, but it could be a carrot to get some of them to do the better thing anyway, which I think is a good thing.
Do you know of any tools that currently use these annotations?
Any of these annotations? Yeah, I know some registry UIs show links to the source if the source URL is like valid and useful. I don't know of any that consume like licenses in any useful way, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were image scanning policy enforcement things that, I mean, it's not verifiable in any way. Like I could say that this image is licensed under some made up license and nobody could really tell me that I'm lying. The newest ones, that the base name and base digest, I don't know of anyone using them yet, but it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem also. Like registries could do interesting things with these, but there aren't enough images in the wild yet that expose that information to build the stuff to take advantage of it. I've built tools that you can run on an image that will check if there's a base image update needed and do a rebase for you and etc. But nothing like in production in force in the wild.
Yeah. The only reason I like these is because it's specced out in the OCI spec, so it's more likely that if we adopted more tools would be willing to do the same. And even if we don't, I'm expecting some registries to show up some information on any of these fields.
Yeah, I mean in the case of the base name and base digest, those were explicitly like inspired by build packs automatic rebase support, and then explicitly proposed to OCI as a like this should be the fundamental issue at stake is not like build pack specific. It's you can apply this to anything, and so you should. So that's definitely this is a comforting next step in the march toward this being everybody. Everybody can rebase their images. But yeah. I'm a huge fan of this. I love this. +1 for me for what it's worth.
I would also be curious to know what other maintainers think, because this I think is the first time we as a project decide to differentiate between the daemon and the non-daemon use case functionally. Like the images are different. So that's also something I want to ask other folks about.
Yeah,
Because
it's definitely the biggest problem I see with it. It's just not the reproducibility is different between the two. And I don't know how much that matters, but it is something that I guess folks could be relying on now, or at least expecting. But maybe if Pack hit it through like an option or something, I'm not sure.
Yeah. It would be nice if for all of these use cases there was a pack publish so that it loaded things in the daemon regardless, but it also stored all this extra metadata somewhere so that when it does need to publish things out, it can take the thing stored in the daemon, take this extra metadata and combine it together and push it out so that you get the same behavior. That was like one of the other options that I was thinking of to support the daemon use case, because this will also flow into the next RFC I want to talk about, which is the cosine one.
Yeah, I almost rather have like if we want to go with this behavior, and I think I'm fine with it, like if the daemon version doesn't match the published version, but maybe have an option on publish to match the daemon behavior as far as outputs, so that you can at least prove they're the same if you need to do that for some reason. But I'm okay. I think I'm okay with defaulting the publish to have different, go somewhere else that has different abilities. So I think for me, I think it's okay.
I'll keep this RFC as it is. If people have strong opinions on the published part, I might put up like an additional RFC on pack publish, which is platform specific for platforms that are choosing to export things to the daemon and then to the registry, so that they have consistency between directly doing pack publish and then pack build with publish and pack build separately and then pack publish. Because that also will flow naturally, because so far you just had the publish flag on build, but now like I've seen this pattern often, like you do a build, but you can also you add push separately to build as a flag, and then you expose a separate push subcommand as well. So guess it makes sense. Yeah, sorry.
I just I feel like there's already like inconsistency in the image that you build locally and then push compared to the one that you publish directly. I think we have people asking in Slack, why are they different? I think what we figured out is that the compression algorithm that Docker uses is different. So it may be that this is not necessarily something that people are relying on.
Yeah, that's a good
I-
good point actually. Not only could Docker's compression algorithm be different, but they can also change it in the future. So even if we did align them both the same, Docker is more than free to change whatever they want about how they push something. And we wouldn't want to have Pack have to chase it. I think it's a useful like guarantee to break actually.
So does that make sense then to like still export to the daemon if we want to, but publish should be like something Pack should own if we want reproducibility across these things? Like Pack will then have to be responsible for tracking all the extra metadata somewhere that's not the daemon to match the outputs.
I kind of think I think that's worth calling out in this proposal, but I don't know that I would necessarily feel like you have to do that right away, right? Like I would. This is one of those cases where I would wait for a user to bump up against it and see if they actually need that, and then based on their experience, you can add that. Like it seems way easier to just have this like publish will set these annotations, and in the proposal there's a if this is a problem in the future, here is how we would solve it. Here's a message to myself in 6 months when this becomes an actual issue. And then if it never becomes an issue, great. We didn't have to build it. That's always nice.
That makes sense to me. Yeah. I'll add that conditional. The other thing, well, like if we have any more comments, we can carry on. But I also wanted to talk about the cosine one. Oh, while I have you, Jason, do you by any chance know what the different fields under history are actually used for? I've only seen created by used in places I've not seen like comment or other things used.
I have also only seen create. I mean, it's a free-form field that Docker build happens to set with the command that produced that layer. In Co, I think we set the history created by to be like the invocation of Co that created this or something. I could look it up and Slack you the specifics, but I don't think it's like load bearing in any way. I don't think it's useful for anything. It's kind of just to be able to show in Docker inspect something nice.
Yeah, I think like the main reason I added that one was like a bunch of registries try to visualize the image. And,
yeah. I mean, I don't think it. I think it assumes something more like the Dockerfile way of building an image, and BuildPack's way of building an image is a bit inconsistent with it, because BuildPacks is, sort of willing to do any kind of crazy stuff to make an image as long as it'll make the build faster, and doesn't necessarily try to make the history look pretty. So yeah, I don't know that I would worry too much about it, and maybe just lean on the registries to not make it look so bad. I don't know how practical.
They currently do a bunch of registries. So there was this tool I think that was shared on Twitter recently, which visualizes the image if you just like in a GitHub style repository with a file browser. If you just give it to like
Delve or something, or
don't remember. I remember it was some proprietary thing created by some company. I don't remember, but BuildPack images didn't even work on it because I think it was just assuming created by there. So like if I tried to load a BuildPack image in there, I couldn't even like see the files, but it worked for all the normal Docker images, which it's like I was hoping to share that tool for like all the BuildPack users, but then like, oh shit, it doesn't work with any of the BuildPack stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's a bug in that tool. I wouldn't feel too bad about you exposing that bug in there. All of these fields, like you're showing on the screen share, they're all optional.
Yeah.
Nobody has to use them.
The last one that I wanted to talk about was this cosine RFC. It's a pretty big change to what the exporter currently does. Like it adds image signing and attaching other artifacts to the image, but given the way things are going, I'm guessing this will, like, the industry is converging on something like this with all the push behind cosine, like with the recent GitHub announcement, and also more people being involved in the whole supply chain conversations. And like it would be really great if Bill Packs could just offer this out of the box and natively, so that all the platforms that want to use it don't have to re-implement it. And if this is part of the life cycle, the other good thing that I was hoping for, like we can still continue to use what we currently do for like rebuilding images and fetching SBOMs and stuff, but like being able to add new attachments to the output image once OCA attachments become a thing, and like we're not following the cosine convention of attaching things, we could do some really nice things in the future if we set ourselves up for it. So I don't even know if this should be in the cosine TOML. The only reason I have it here is because these are currently cosine related artifacts or conventions to export SBOMs in. But the idea is that you can specify all of these fields, or the platform can specify all of these fields in a cosine TOML and provide it to the lifecycle, and the lifecycle would be responsible for exporting all of these signatures and SBOMs in the right format alongside the image. So this ensures that all the images we produce, if the platform chooses to do so, would be signed, and the SBOM, if present, would be attached to it. And if the platform chooses to do so, we'll also sign the SBOM for them. It's like a lot of nice features. I know also people have been really excited about a bunch of these supply chain security features we've introduced in build packs recently, and I think this would be really nice. This is again conditional on the same thing we just talked about. All of this only works on the registry use case, does not work on the daemon use case, because the cosine exports this things as non-tarred files, and their media types are also different than what Docker expects to load in the daemon. And cosine currently has a convention where it chooses to name these images based on the manifest digest. So we don't have that in the daemon either. So there's no nice way of signing these things or putting them anywhere.
Yeah, just a couple comments on this. I think I would recommend not trying to solve SBOM signing just yet. Like it's a useful scoping, like scope down the issue so that you only do signing the image, and then as soon as that works, like signing the SBOM should be relatively straightforward, but at least you don't have to deal with it right away. And the other one is, I think you definitely don't want password data and password in a file in this config. You can either prompt the user for it, or if the cosine password environment variable is set, use that or something else. But it scares me that this file would have base64 password data in it. And then yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I took most of these things from like the cube config format. I don't know what, because like these files, if you mount them as volumes on a pod, it would be somewhere, I guess. I just didn't know where to put it. So that's why it's optional. Either you can provide a pointer to a file or embedded inline. The reason I didn't choose to go with an environment variable is because we support multiple such configs. So you could have different private keys with different passwords.
Right.
So that's why I couldn't choose a single environment variable to do.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to think about that more, but I think there's a way to solve it. Maybe some mapping of key foo cosine password to cosine password or something like that. I don't know, designing on the fly, but definitely all the rest of these things look great. Oh, the private key might be another sensitive thing you don't want to include in this file.
Yep.
We think about the repository. I'm just thinking about platforms that maybe abstract away where they're actually pushing the image to like a private repo. Like we do that. Like, you might have a public registry somewhere that you can push things to. But we are currently overriding that when we actually execute the lifecycle with the, like, maybe a sidecar already authenticated like path to a registry or something like that. How do we think we should handle something that's in a config file like that?
Wait, sorry, I didn't get you. What do you mean?
So today, when someone pushes a source code up and we're turning it into an image, they don't necessarily know where we're pushing it. Like as part of like when you do an export, we actually pass the image tags ourselves from the platform, and so these are like maybe like localhost with a colon, something that's going to a sidecar and then pushing off to an actual registry somewhere. And so I'm wondering if we want to co-locate the cosine data with that image, are we going to have to like read in this file and like change the repository to be that sort of local proxied repository, or should we have flags to override that?
Because this thing is a static value, so it doesn't change. Like even if you provide different tags, what it does is it uses this repository to figure out the prefix, and then like it somehow uses that along with the output tag name to generate the final tag it will be pushed out to.
But I think Jesse's point is that if a user is exporting and thinks they're exporting to x.io, that certain platforms would intercept that, change it to something else, and have an intermediate that pushes to x.io. And this is a new place where they would have to have logic for that. I think this might also be something that should just be omitted from this initial proposal, and in a future work, known gaps, like this is something we think the use case for signing for cosine signing something and pushing the signatures to a different repository is relatively niche, I think, and mostly motivated by ECR having immutable tags. And so I think it would still be useful to support cosine without it having an answer for the cosine repository code path, right away. I think there's a lot of value you can get just from signing in build packs, and then you can solve cosine repository later when you have answered Jesse's questions about how to abstract away the registry.
So the reason I introduced this was like the KPAC cosine RFC currently implements the repository part, and one of the reasons why we personally use cosine repository is we want to push the signatures to a different repository than where the images are pushed, so that we control with how someone can like delete or modify the signatures versus how to delete or modify the image.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So like technically this allows us to like control that the signatures would never be deleted, or like if someone accidentally does something crazy with the image, they're not doing anything crazy with the signature.
It can also just be useful to have different ACLs on signatures and images. Like you can delete the image, but you can't delete the signature, etc., or something like that. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess this being optional is fine. But yeah, it is interesting because if like you said, if they're thinking it's going to XYZ and it's not really going there, now we have to intercept that in some way. But if they're going to a completely different registry with different credentials, then that sounds like a perfectly valid use case that I would want to allow as well.
Yeah. In the meantime, could your platform, how hard is it to detect that this repository config is set and even just fail and say, like, we don't support this yet?
Yeah,
Or-
and that's probably what we would do. Yeah, in the short term at least.
Okay.
I think that's what KPAC does as well. Like if
It's just another file we have to slurp in and then figure out and read it and then fail on it. And then obviously this file is probably going to change over time. And so it's just more complexity to the platform. So it's just trying to figure out if there's a way that would maybe make that easier.
Yep. That's also why I added this to the analyzer so that we could do a bunch of these things in the analyzer before passing it on at the very end. So you can fail early and then like later on decide whether what to do or not.
Yeah, I actually really wish it wasn't in the analyzer because of that. It's less about our platform specifically, but it would be really nice if we didn't support the cosign repository, then it could only exist in exporter. As far as I know, right? Because it's the same registry, or it would be the same registry that the primary one goes to. If we make those assumptions, then I think the interface becomes a lot simpler. But obviously, we lose cosign repository.
I don't even know if cosign right now what convention it has when you do cross. Like if you set the cosign repository value to a different registry, I don't know how that works. I've not tried that.
I think it just assumes and expects that there exist credentials to be able to push there. I think it just constructs another reference and tries to push the signature to it. Like, I don't think it has any special logic to say like separate registries are involved. It doesn't even really care.
Yeah. Maybe for the environment variable use case, I could put an env table here with like possible ways to source that set of environment variable values from. So like the platform can decide its own convention of setting different like cosigned password values. It just has to map that here. But I didn't have a good way of doing that, so I just kept it to like either point to a file, which is the case if you're mounting the secret as a volume, or put it as a value if you're mounting it as an environment variable, and then the platform's responsible for taking that environment variable value and putting it here somehow.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see how, because KPAC already supports this, right? Already supports cosign. I'd be curious how KPAC would work with its cosign config and with buildpack's config under it, having like, at what point, like, should users then stop using KPAC's cosign config and start using the buildpack's cosign config, or both, or neither, or whatever? I don't know. I don't know enough about KPAC to know if that's even a silly question, but.
So this is not exposed to the user. This is only exposed to the platform. The platform can choose to convert its inputs to this value however it wants. So at least on the KPAC side, there'd be no difference in the way the user interacts with it. The export pod, or like whatever is doing the exporting, or sets up that container will have to mount this file somehow and run the lifecycle exporter.
Gotcha. So this might actually just be a different way for KPAC. KPAC would take its user input config, construct this file, pass this through analyzer and exporter, and have to do less work overall. Like they just offload that to buildpack. Excellent.
Yep. That was the hope for this, and like any other platform that wants to do this, that like they don't have to implement all of this cosign logic again and again. They just have to construct this file. The way KPAC stores these things right now is in form of a secret. So like cosine has a Kate's generate key pair command that directly uploads to a Kate secret. We just, I believe, added a few annotations on that secret to add the environment variables. I don't remember how it handles the password. But it just mounts that secret somewhere. I'm assuming since it's password, I'm assuming it's just an extra key on that secret apart from the other keys that cosine uploads. So if I remember correctly, that's what it does. It just mounts the whole thing as a volume with the private key, the password, and the public key, because the cosine also generates the public key as part of that command. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like the last one, I am hugely in support of this. I think it might be useful to scope things out until, especially anything that has a question about it, like SBOMs, just scope it out for now, get some signing in, get KPAC to use it, and then
I think that's the main issue. Like platforms won't use it until it makes their lives easier. And if a platform is implementing more things than what the lifecycle currently does, like they might as well do the whole thing.
Yeah. Does KPAC do anything with SBOMs? Does KPAC care about?
I mean, we added support for as like the new SBOM build pack SBOM stuff recently. I don't think it's merged, but it's not yet released.
Okay.
But it doesn't export them out in the cosine format.
Gotcha.
It supports everything till here. These last two things are new. And I think KPAC is currently the only build packs platform that I'm aware of which supports cosine.
Well, technically or arguably, Tecton with Tecton chains would also support cosine with build packs, but I think that's probably stretching the truth too far. Yeah. This looks cool. I'm gonna have to read this more and I'll have more comments, but this looks great. I gotta run, but this has been very helpful. Thanks, folks.
Anything else?
I think everyone who might have input on my question is not in attendance, but
Okay.
I guess, well, maybe I'll just share like the conundrum that I'm in right now. I don't know what to work on next. There's like so many things to work on, but it's hard to tell what's the most important and the most pressing. I do want to help where I can with the just the conversations that's happening around image extensions and Docker files, and there's a lot of people kind of chiming in, and I don't want to duplicate other people's work, but I also want to help. So, but I think, yeah.
Yeah, I also don't know how much of a priority like all of this supply chain stuff is going to be over the image extension stuff. But I also think the scope is fairly different. I still don't know how well scoped out or large those image extension changes are going to be. Whereas like most of these things are pretty well defined, I think. At least we know what to expect and what kind of API changes to expect.
Yeah.
That being said, I'm happy to help out with these things if any of the implementation maintainers don't have the time to work on them. I care a lot about a lot of these things. but I also want to discuss with the larger working group on what their thoughts are on all of these changes. The biggest one that might impact the other extension stuff is the decision whether we want to diverge between the daemon use case and the registry use case, and whether we should keep on supporting the daemon use case.
Yeah. Of course, even if we get rid of the daemon and just export in OCI layout format, will we have a manifest? In that case, we will. Also, then these questions go away, kind of.
What questions go away?
Do we want to diverge, right? Because then we have no daemon to diverge from.
Yeah. If we export it in the OCI layout format, the other good thing is like GGCR has the ability to preserve the whole thing entirely when moving between registries, like including difference in compression we get between daemon and registry. So I am still not sure how it does that, but it claims that it can move images between registries without changing the digest. Given that and given how these other tools that I've seen supporting OCI layout, I think we should be able to just, like, if you're using GGCR instead of registry, we can, like, it just has an option to export to the local folder. So in terms of the lifecycle changes, there's very little to change. That's the good thing about GGCR. You can just change where you want to load or export things to, and you can just pass the reference. I think in terms of implementation, it might be fairly, or not fairly, well, it won't be that difficult. It would also mean that we are in the more standardized future-facing OCI specification path rather than having to support something that's Docker specific versus OCI specific, because they diverge and then you have to do other things to keep them in sync.
I'm in favor of it. I think also, Juan has done a fair amount of work. Like, he actually already has it sort of working. It's just a matter of taking what he's done and putting it up there in the life cycle and getting maybe an RFC and some eyes on that.
I saw that pull request. It exports things to a local folder right now, though, like in the back. I think the piece that's missing is the lifecycle should export in OCI layout, and back should take that and load it into the daemon.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to talk about, which was the part I was not sure of. I guess we can leave that for the next office hours when one is there.
Sounds good.
But I think, like, fundamentally the changes to the life cycle should hopefully not be a lot. And we can, if we are using GGCR, we might also be able to get away with not introducing any new flags at all. We can just use like the prefix convention that GGCR uses to parse references. So if it's local, I think that it has some convention for specifying local OCI layout. So like, just if it's OCI layout : / and the tags or whatever for the analysis phase or the exporting phase, we can just look at the local path. If it's a registry, we just push to registry, and the lifecycle doesn't have to know anything. It just relies on GGCR to do the right thing.
That'd be nice. Should we adjourn and pick this up next time?
Yeah.
That's good. Thank you, Sam. So good
Thanks.
discussion.